Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's recap of the talking points from the 2024 Divisional Round of the playoffs in association with our partner QuinnBet. It's arguably the most anticipated and indeed enjoyable weekend of the NFL season, and it did not disappoint. So just to sum up, on Saturday, the Ravens surged past a game but ultimately overmatched Texans team. Later that night, the 49ers rode their luck and somehow got off the ropes against the Packers to earn the right to host the NFC Championship game in Santa Clara. On Sunday, the Lions forced a Baker Mayfield turnover to finally finish off the Bucs. And in the early hours of Monday morning, the Chiefs delivered a first playoff win of the Mahomes era on the road at the expense of the Bills. Why did it have to be the Bills? Poor old Buffalo. We'll get there and to all of those talking points. But before we do, let's just get to some of the latest NFL news, as the 28 teams that have no longer got a remaining interest in this season are handling their off-field business, and they're doing it at pace. Brian, it looks like the Bears have found themselves a new offensive coordinator. Shane Waldron, ex of the Seattle Seahawks, reported to be the man who's emerged from that quite lengthy interview process. They got on the road early, to be fair to them, and they seem to have lined their man up, and a man who was in demand this interviewing off season.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it came on a left wing, but I suppose the nature of who they'd been scouting and obviously interviewing, there was obviously looked like they were going to go for a young, dynamic offensive coordinator. The interesting piece I took from it today was, if you read some of the frustration which Seattle fans have had, they're very kind of similar to what the Bears fans have had with Getsy over the course of the last year. But you would say that Geno Smith's career has kind of evolved again, not necessarily maybe this year as much as it was last year when he was under no pressure, and he turned them around.
Geno Smith came out of nowhere and went to the Pro Bowl last year. That's the pro Waldron case.
Is that the measuring stick these days? There's loads of players not making the Pro Bowl. They should be in the Pro Bowl. We've had this disgruntlement over the past few weeks, but he did, in fairness, with all due respect to go in there and obviously take on that role when there was pressure on after the Russell Wilson situation. And they've had, I suppose, a fruitful 2 years. Maybe not necessarily as productive this year, but it's an interesting horror. Like, it's hot on the heels now. Defensive coordinator seems to be the next one. And again, looks like a few young and up-and-coming coaches are going to win and be measured up for that role as well. It'd be interesting to see what comes of it, because ultimately it looks like he will be taking on a brand new quarterback come April. And that's my interpretation of what's happened over the course of the last week with Getsy moving on. It looks like, in particular the press conference, I think they're saying all the right things about Justin Fields to try, for me, drive up a bargaining chip for people to come after him. But ultimately, I think it'll end with a new quarterback coming April, the back end of April with the draft.
No, completely. And as we were saying last week, I think the very fact that they interviewed Cliff Kingsbury and looked to be getting the download on Caleb Williams as part of that, and not to your point, Colm, wasting the opportunity of the interview process. Oh, sure, we'll get him in the room and dangle a card of a job while we pick his brains and see how we're going to use the guy that we plan to draft with the number one overall pick. My read on that, Brian, with Waldron is the Luke Getsy thing. Guy with no play calling experience is always a risk as OC. Now, the case that you would put to the alternate on that is Bobby Slowick. Obviously, didn't have play calling experience and lit it up with CJ Stroud at the Texans this year, so it can be done. On the other hand, I don't know if the Bears were going to recruit an up and coming defensive coordinator. Do they also want an OC who doesn't have play calling experience? You can lean on Eberflus on the defensive side of the ball, so that kind of takes care of itself. On the offensive side of the ball, I think they wanted somebody that they know can actually call a game. And that was one of the big frustrations with Getsy. It was not necessarily that the scheme was necessarily wrong. It was just the play calling was inconsistent and up and down. So that's my read there. Colm, Matt Patricia's back on the market. His time with the Eagles has come to an end, and like the old Star Wars meme, not short enough your reign was, as Yoda might say, as far as some Eagles fans are concerned. Although that might be slightly unfair to Matt Patricia, because it wasn't exactly going swimmingly before then. Ron Rivera now being linked with that vacant defensive coordinator job, with Sean Desai going under the bus, according to ESPN.
I mean, you're saying it not fair. He went into a bad situation though, Connor, and he somehow made it infinitely worse. It's like Futurama. Great news, everyone! Is what Nick Sirianni announced as Matt Patricia. He truly the angel of death. No situation so bad that Matt Patricia showing up can't make you feel worse about things. I don't understand what his redeeming qualities are. Nobody has a nice word to say about him. You know, there were, when he joined the Eagles last year, there were probably 3 or 4 Eagles players who'd taken
Well, maybe, and here's my crazy theory, Colin. Maybe the Matt Patricia thing is right when you know the thing is going in a bad direction, you bring Patricia in, get it to rock bottom quickly, and then you hope for the upswing. Wasn't it getting him out of the building to turn things around in Detroit?
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what Bill Belichick was hoping by bringing him back in. There's probably a whole show that you could do on aging head coaches, or head coaches have been in situ a while making a bad decision. Andy Reid did something similar, which essentially led to the end of his time in Philly. The Ron Rivera stuff, that's an interesting one. To me, that smells of somebody who, like, basically the owners have kind of gone, we want somebody else in there who, if Sirianni, if they decide to move on after 6 games next year, somebody who has some experience, that they'll just kind of plonk in there. It makes no real sense. Ron is not. He's a lovely man. We've had the good fortune to talk to him, but is he really creating these defensive schemes that you know are cutting edge? Like we've seen the Washington defense over the past few years. It's
Spare me the cutting edge defense. You put a hat in a hat, you take a guy down. That's all that counts.
I just think I think there are going to be next year a litany of lame duck coaches in and around the league. I think Nick Sirianni is one of those, and I think this speaks a little bit to that.
Sean McDermott, maybe we shall get there. We'll have that conversation. Brian, suggestions that Bill Belichick might not actually be the shoe-in for the Falcons job. They've gone for additional interviews, including Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, and even in the last half an hour before we kicked off, they've also requested now to interview the Ravens defensive coordinator, McDonald, to go down there and have an interview. They're certainly reaching out to a number of people, which
he's like, not that he was not a hot name coming into this process, but like the Texans did not have a single possession inside the red zone in that playoff game. Like, that's some job.
And not one explosive play beyond 25 yards, I believe, in the whole game. He literally sniffed out any opportunity. They couldn't run the ball, and they couldn't do anything else thereafter. But I know we're going to come to that. But yeah, he's a hot commodity now. Essentially, it looks like he's going to get some opportunity. But the Falcons, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of moved away from Belichick slightly, in the sense of last week there was the initial meeting, then there was a second meeting, and everybody was kind of reporting on all various different podcasts. It was a done deal, and you know, they were going down there essentially to tie up the loose ends of who's going to be on his coaching staff, but it's all kind of moved away slightly. But yeah, an interesting nugget that came out today was nobody else reached out for an interview with Bill Belichick. Now, is that because essentially they all know he's getting the Falcons job, or because maybe the Belichick that we love and remember from his great days of the Patriots may not necessarily be the one that everybody wants, and people are kind of shying away from giving them an opportunity to interview? It's an interesting one. And I think ultimately what will happen is he'll get the job, because I think others may want to go elsewhere, including Harbaugh. I think Harbaugh's heart is set on that Chargers job, but ultimately he's going to play the bargaining tool and go around the houses until he gets the offer in which he wants.
Or Belichick decides he doesn't like any of the offers that are out there. Stay with me now. Broadcasting contract with Fox, bring him and Brady back together again, put them up against the Manning cast.
Well, there is a narrative out there that he'll take a year off, and because he wants because he sees a bigger picture to what you're initially talking about there, that there's a lot of lame ducks for next season, and there might be some more plausible jobs that he's after that will be available come next year, and he will sit tight for a year and get the role in which he'd want. And that's not against the realms of possibility. We saw that last year with Sean Payton, or did we, in terms of what role job he took? But no, he took a year out, came back coaching. There is also a conversation that Belichick might consider doing that as well. Interesting.
Yeah, well, and we heard Peter King on Sky at the weekend talking about how that Shula record is all important. He wants that record. You know, doing it somewhere like Carolina might take a long time at the pace you'd have to go there to accumulate the wins necessary to do it. Never mind another Lombardi without Tom Brady, as we've already talked about before. And speaking of Peter King, if you read this week's edition of Football Morning in America, which you'll find on the Pro Football Talk section of the NBC Sports website, you'll know the Chiefs coach Andy Reid in his pre-game notes had identified critical plays on the O-line and D-line in the fourth quarter and ball security in the freezing weather as the two areas where the game would be won and lost. That's the kind of insight we're looking forward to hearing from Peter when he joins us on March 28th in Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. That's in association with our partners RuPoint, QuinnBet and the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Limited number tickets still available. You can find the link through our social channels at IRNFL on X, that's IRENFL, and IRE NFL show on Instagram. So, Colm, how did the Chiefs become the only road team and the only underdog to win in the divisional round? Because, to be fair to Coach Reid, those did turn out to be crucial variables among many others in an instant classic of a game.
Patrick Mahomes. He's the best player in the league. He's ridiculous. Like everything he does. I mean, it gets talked about constantly. The fact that his ability, but also like his scrambling ability, and the fact that he doesn't appear to run. He's always fast enough, and you hear it, and then every time you see it, I'm still amazed by it, right? Because if he needs 4 yards, he gets 5. If he needs 13 yards, he gets 14. It's always the way he is.
And if there's
good.
a guy in his way to pump fake when he's clearly about 3 yards past the line of scrimmage and he still fakes out Rasul Douglas.
And just that ability, like what we are seeing, I suppose, in the playoffs at the moment, is the ability to not take sacks is so important. And you saw that with Mahomes, you saw that with Allen, you saw that
Lamar,
with Lamar in the second half. Right? Lamar learned a valuable lesson, and we'll get to that, but the top guys, you cannot take sacks. It puts you behind. But Mahomes, again, there have been frustrations this year. It's the worst group he's had to work with for sure. But they're there, and it's because of him. And he raises all those around him. He holds them to the standard, and they're in their 6th straight AFC championship. I mean, only Brady and Belichick are above them. And the other piece is obviously the defense. Like, they were going up against Josh Allen, who I'll probably touch on it more, and maybe I can come back to it. I'm massive. Mahomes is the best player in the league. Josh Allen, to me, is the most entertaining, and Lamar is the most dangerous. They were able.
I think sometimes, Colm, you see. Well, it's not just sometimes. It's a lot of the time in sports. You really see who somebody is when the tide goes out. Like, they didn't lose that game because of Josh Allen. He was the only thing keeping them in it. He is amazing, and it's horrible to see a guy lose a game like that in those circumstances. When you see the caliber of man he is and the caliber of player he is, when it wasn't going right, like he did everything he could to try and turn it back in their direction.
Oh no, he absolutely puts the team on his back, and you would have seen again in Peter King's column, he talked about like Travis Kelce, as Travis is running to get the golf cart to go up to Taylor in the suite, and he said, like, these games, I mean, it's Josh versus Patty, as he calls him. I mean, that's what it is. But Mahomes, he is sensational. His vision, his escapability, is everything about him. He makes
his ability to get Marquez Valdes-Scantling catch balls.
Yeah, yes.
There's loads of Packers fans, like, we'll get to the Packers obviously, and their own playoff exit. Unfortunate though, way it's been, but like, I'm sure whatever about Saturday night, on Sunday night they were banging their heads, going, this guy is catching clutch balls now. What witchcraft have you performed on Marquez Valdes-Scantling to get him to do the one thing he could never do in Green Bay?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, throughout the season, the Chiefs haven't been fantastic. It is not a vintage Chiefs team, but they're still there, and the defense is very impressive. And yes, Baltimore will probably touch on our favorites, but no, they're not going to enjoy having to face up against this Chiefs team and against Spags.
Brian, maybe a word on that Chiefs defense before we move on to the Bills, because there's plenty to discuss there as well. But we talked about Spag's ability to confuse people and what they've done all season long, and how they've had to lean on the defense, and how we thought they might have to lean on them in this game, which they did, but maybe not in the way that we thought that they would, because they were getting shredded for a lot of this game, particularly in the run game. But when it really mattered, they got a couple of critical red zone stops, and they stepped up just when they needed to, and they did just enough at just the right time, and showed just enough flexibility to get to grips with what was going wrong and stop taking on water. And that, and Mahomes joked about it after the game, how he told the defense, "You just step up and we'll win this game."
Yeah, I was reading a piece today on Spagnuolo. He said in one of the aftermath interviews that he recognised it wasn't enough for the defense to be able to stop the run, so he started refocusing on where they essentially could stop the Bills, and that was to shut them down as best they could with the passing game. And they didn't give up any. Like, when you compare the passing which Mahomes had and with Josh Allen in terms of the long marquee plays, I mean, the Chiefs only had 5 third downs in the entirety of the game, because they were getting those big end plays early on. Like, the Bills, by and large, didn't really have many big plays. I know there was a few towards the end of the game, the fourth quarter, when they essentially dialed them up twice and they weren't complete. But by and large, the coverage.
I think that pass to MVS that we just talked about, which was a 30-yard pass, I believe, was the longest play from scrimmage in the entire game.
And is that the second one or the first one? Because people were putting up memes last night. Yeah, the second one in particular. What was more impressive about the second one, and Colin has rightly called it out, it's the nature of how he was able to evolve himself in the pocket and make the play happen. I thought the one earlier on, I think it was the opening play of the second half, the one when he goes over the shoulder to Scantling was very impressive as well. And
but as you say, it's the one where he kind of sidesteps and has to reset his platform and then slings it like with the arm 3/4. I don't know how he even does that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I thought the offensive line in particular as well. I know we're taking away from the defense Chiefs, but the offensive line for the Chiefs needs to be called out. And like, when I don't believe to be going up against a marquee front seven in the Bills, people are suggesting this Bills defense has been great and it's one of the upper echelons of the season. I don't think we've seen it over the course of the last 5 to 6 weeks. To be on this run certainly wasn't down to the defense. You called it there. It's more about Josh Allen and his play. But overall, like, and you touched on it there as well, kind of the critical time in the game is okay. We've allowed you to go down and drive, but we're into critical stages of a game. This is a turning point in a season, albeit it's playoffs. Can we withstand it? Because even taken away from the Bass missed field goal, if they make that field goal, there's 2:11 left on the clock and Chiefs with 2 timeouts. And the nature of how that game has gone, you genuinely would believe that the Chiefs would drive down and put themselves in a position with, a great kicker like Harrison Butker to go and kick a game-winning field goal. Obviously didn't transpire that way. The defense stood up again, and that's what we said on the show. And I didn't think it'd be as high scoring.
See the stat on the screen? Butker is 31 of 34 on field goals made when the temperature is below 0.
But this is it. You've got these players, crucial players that can make, we're talking about Mahomes, obviously marquee players and special teams that can make it. Like, Pacheco was fantastic throughout the course of the game, I thought, and yet when they really need that force down, he gets it at the end. I want to call on Andy Reid, because Andy Reid's a great coach, but we obviously coaches, when a player fumbles in the game, okay, I don't really trust him again to make a play for me. I'll leave him alone for the night. His head is gone. Hardman fumbled on his opening catch of the game. They managed to recover it. His second play of the game, it's not necessarily a fumble. When it is a fumble, by the nature of the rules, he's obviously stretching out, trying to get it into the end zone. But I was surprised, because that was an opportunity to kill the game off. The fake punt, and we might come to that now in terms of that particular play call. But where they were and the way Pacheco was running, to me, that was like, give the ball to Pacheco and let him drive this in, puts the game away. They'd be up by 2 scores, and he calls a play for Hardman, which really surprised me, bearing in mind he'd already fumbled in the game. But I'd love to hear the thoughts on the fake punt, if that's where you want to go next.
Yeah, Colin, absolutely, because there's no point rubbing salt in Buffalo's wounds on wide right and revisiting Scott Norwood and all that, and poor El Tyler Bass. I really feel for him. But let's talk Sean McDermott and that play call, because I don't think I've ever been watching a game before and it being so blatant that they're gonna call a fake punt here. I mean, this is the most critical play of the entire season. Your season's on the line, and you're going to rely on your special teams, the team's glaring weakness in Buffalo, rather than leave the ball in the hands of your all-world quarterback, Josh Allen. It's a terrible, terrible play call. And, if you talk about the football gods hating Buffalo, don't do things that are going to make the footballing gods hate you even more.
Yeah, it was. It was a poor decision. And to me, the fact everybody knew it was coming, except apparently Damar Hamlin, because when he actually got the ball in his hand, it was he just looked absolutely lost. Um, and it was kind of like something you'd expect in South Park or something like that, where there's this big crescendo music, and it's gonna be the Disney-esque finish, and the man who came back to life is getting the ball on fourth down, and he's gonna, and then smack. It's like Final Destination, where the bus comes and it takes Damar Hamlin again. Um, yeah, it was poor, but it's not the only poor decision, that ultimately has happened. And the look, my concern is you have Josh Allen, and you only get, there are only so many years of Josh Allen, particularly elite Josh Allen. I don't think we're not talking about, I don't believe, a Tom Brady-esque career with the style in which Josh Allen plays football.
And your cap hit multiplies next year. Josh Allen his salary is weighing more heavily on that roster every single year as other players age and have to be replaced. The Jordan Poyers, the Micah Hydes, they're not going to be around forever either. It's not getting
No,
any
I
easier.
mean, yeah, no, this is a group that really kind of came together, the basis of it in 2018. And they have done an awful lot to keep it together kind of ever since then. But it's the law of diminishing returns since 2020. They went to the championship game in 2020, and then divisional round, divisional round, divisional round. And is that enough? Are you happy to just keep trying to run it back? Because ultimately they made the change with, during the season in terms of the OC, but it was the Josh Allen show, and it's been the Josh Allen show every single year, and it doesn't feel like they've done a huge amount to help him. And the Diggs thing, like we saw towards the end of the end of last year, and then the stuff over the summer. But Diggs has not been a real part of this offense this season.
He's absolute flat track bully. Like, he can do all the talking he wants. He had the play that could have saved the game for the Bills, and he didn't make it.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's over the course of the entire season as well. Like he just hasn't been WR1 when they have needed him to be that. I don't know how many times you can go to the well. Like, first in the AFC East, 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 and you can't get to the Super Bowl. I think it might be even different if you were in the Super Bowl, but you're not, and you keep running into the same issues again and again and again in the playoffs.
And in some ways, you had an artificially easy run this year because Joe Burrow, so the Bengals are out of the race, so you end up with the Steelers in the wild card round. That wasn't the most difficult obstacle to negotiate. You also caught a break because Aaron Rodgers got injured after 4 snaps in New York, so you didn't have to navigate past that in the East. Albeit that you had the Dolphins, who had a fine season in and of themselves. But yeah, it's only going to get more difficult from here for the Bills, and you would wonder whether McDermott is actually the man to get them over the line.
49 million in dead cap at the minute. I know obviously they'll readjust and do whatever they have to do. I suppose their own internal analysis of players and their season, how productive they were before we hit March and free agency, but doesn't give them a lot of leg room, you would think. And essentially, you'd imagine they'll have to try rebuild certain holes through the draft as opposed to being really active in free agent. But there's probably a few players there that are on expansive contracts that they can either make hard decisions on or try to kick the can down the road with contracts. But right now, if you go on to overthecap.com, it's 49 million in a hole, and that doesn't bode well. But then went the Bucks in 80 million in a hole, and they made the divisional round as well this year. So, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a bad season, but still sounds like a lot of work to be done.
Does indeed. And that brings us to the end of our first segment of Divisional Round Talking Points. Brian, we start our second segment of 2024 Divisional Round Talking Points with the Lions. And we talked about how this game against the Bucks, after the emotional release of the first playoff win in 30 years, the previous weekend, might set this up as being something of a letdown. That didn't prove to be the case. Look, we all know the Lions are a flawed team, but at the same time, they're getting it done, and with each passing week, the belief builds, and Dan Campbell's not going to let that pot come off the boil.
Yeah, I thought it was a strange game in many ways because it never felt like they had control of it. It always seemed like I always felt they'd have enough because of the nature of how they play and how they can pick up big plays very quickly. In the second half, I think they recognise it's not going to work for Montgomery in this game. We'll not necessarily shut them down, but even in the first half, where there was an opportunity to use him to drive into the end zone, they went away from the run game, and then they eventually went back and forth down. Got Gibbs really actively involved in the second half. Obviously, he goes off in a 31, but even then, they allowed the Bucs to come straight back down the field. And when it looked like, obviously, the Browns, his name escapes me now, they're fantastic wide receiver who had the touchdown in the back end of the end zone that put them. Amon-Ra, sorry, yeah. So he scores. It looks like the game essentially is done. They allowed him to go back down the field. I think critical drives for the Bucs. The Bucs had, like, if you look at the time of possession against the Lions, it was more Bucs. It was more geared towards the Bucs. For me, the Bucs were in 4 particular drives throughout the game where it looked like they were in a good position to get into at least field goal range, and then there was 4 sacks essentially, and then there was 4 tackles behind the line of scrimmage at critical points in the game. Obviously, players coming up big on the perimeter and sacking Baker Mayfield. It looks like he didn't even know they were coming at times, but they were critical points in the game when it looked like the Bucs were getting up a steam. The game didn't start very well for the line in terms of 3 and out, 31 seconds off the clock. There was the same early on in the second half, but it's a toughness that this team has created, and it's very much from the head coach, and where they don't seem to panic. And teams of old or Lions of old would have panicked in those situations. They didn't. They got over the line. Again, Ben Johnson, I felt, as we touched on there, he called a great second half. They kind of came out and they used Laporte. And again, Laporte has been struggling, but that opening touchdown to Reynolds, there was three throws in a row to Laporte. Like, at certain critical points in the game, all the players that needed to step up stepped up, whether it was in the run game, wide receivers, tight ends, and defensively at the right time. But still concerned about the nature of how the Bucs, for example, can go 92 yards with less than, with a minute and 11 seconds and put a touchdown on them. If they were to allow the secondary was allow big players next week against a team who have a lot of talent, that concerns me that the Lions won't have enough next week. But look, they are where we expected it to be in terms of we all selected them. They got over the line, but I still think, again, a better team on the night might have beaten them, and that concerns me for them going to Santa Clara next week.
Colm, the Bucs weren't the better team on the night. It was the turnovers, the Baker turnovers, that ultimately killed them and were the difference in the game. But where do they go from here? I'm kind of interested as to what Tampa Bay does next year, because this certainly wasn't a bad year, particularly based on where expectations would have been in this studio before the season started, and in many other places. We wouldn't have expected it to end in the divisional round. We thought they'd be gone long before here. But do they try to run it back with Baker? Big question mark for them, I suppose, ultimately is not only that, but is Mike Evans going to be in town? Because without him, you're not going many places in a hurry.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting quandary that I suppose the Bucs find themselves in, because this is very likely the ceiling with Baker, realistically. Mike Evans playing as well as we have seen him play, and you're looking at he's free agent. Baker is a free agent. I think at this point the OC will be coming back, but they're not in a position where they can really go up and probably get a QB. But if you give Baker a contract, to me, you should probably be looking to give it the length of the Daniel Jones contract with potentially the Jimmy G money. Not the Daniel Jones money. Sorry, Brian. I think in and around the kind of mid-20s, you can live with, given where the cap is at. Anything more than that, and I'd probably be saying to Baker, thanks very much, we'll roll the dice, and if we need to bring Jacoby Brissett in here next year, then we'll go with that. Like, I think there are certain things Baker does very well, and if you're playing him in a kind of an air raid offense, almost where he's just airing it out and you're giving him the go balls, then that's good. But you saw ultimately the Lions were able to turn the screw, and that's what good defenses will do. They do need to improve in other areas. But given where they were, given the cap hit that they had to deal with from Brady's retirement, I think they could be reasonably happy. I think the criticism of Todd Bowles for being a realist and saying, why didn't he use the last time out? Like, come on, the game was over, it was done, and it's crazy to me that has become a talking point. It tells you a lot about the media landscape. But I do think if Baker isn't willing to do that, I think you say you move on elsewhere. I know it's not ideal, but I do think they probably need to look to the future as well. I think you can only go so far with a Baker Mayfield.
The other personnel issue there, Brian, is the destination of Mike Evans, who's a pending free agent. There were no WR1s available in free agency last year. It was, you had what you had. Half the league would want to add this guy if they have the cap space to do it. You can see a lot of potentially exciting landing spots for him, and you wonder, NFC South is the soft pass into the playoffs, or so it's perceived to be, certainly at the moment. But he wants to go to a contender. You can imagine him going somewhere like the Packers, where they'd certainly benefit from having someone like him in the receiving room, although not that they look light on receiving talent. They have the cap room to do it. There's others in the same place. He'll be getting a lot of calls, or his agent will.
Yeah, it's interesting. Colin was trying to suggest a magical number, which I imagine they'll look to get to with Baker, but how much is that based on? How much of that they're going to have to free up, in terms of what Evans will require to stay on. Obviously, there's the tag as well, which I don't think is really a viable option, because you're essentially taking the entirety of that particular amount off on that 1 year. Like, he's going to be the highly sought after wide receiver. Like, you saw it again last night; it's fantastic. And we touched on last week, he's had a quieter end to the season. The previous week, he only had 3 receptions against the Eagles. He only had 2 receptions against the Panthers. He'd finished the season not at the measures of what he was playing in early on in the season, but obviously come playoff time, you lead on your big receiver. He was fantastic last night. That one, we touched on there, the 92-yard drive, but more so that the catch, just leading up to halftime, and the nature of how he was able to get that play was fantastic. And just actually, I'm interested to hear the thoughts on that 2-point conversion, and more so the fact that he was, adamant there was a flag on it. And Collinsworth said, no flag here, nothing to look at here. But even the cornerback wasn't even looking at the ball, so it could have went either way. But for me, he's the type of wide receiver that comes up and makes that play. So I found that it was surprising that the flag wasn't shown. We're getting away to the point. He's going to have a number of opportunities. There's already stuff on some sites today on top 5 destinations. Thankfully, the Giants seems to be one of the ones as a potential landing spot. I can't see that myself, but Colts and other teams in the mix. He's going to have a lot of offers. Might ultimately come down to where he wants to play more so, rather than when he wants to get paid, because he is coming to the back end of his, not necessarily the back end of his career, but he's got the years left. He may want to go somewhere where there's a real opportunity to be in with a chance to go to Super Bowl next year.
Colin, let's talk 49ers. Not since Clint Eastwood in Escape from Alcatraz has someone engineered and getting out of jail rather in San Francisco in the way that the 49ers did on Saturday night. What happened here? Because I'm still scratching my head wondering how the Packers let it slip. Because I don't know whether the 49ers are rusty because of the bye, or whether they just had some previously unexposed flaws brought to light at the worst possible time, but they didn't look like themselves. Is it that they weren't allowed to be themselves, or that they just weren't on it?
I think there are a couple of things to it, Connor. I think that the Packers did have a good game plan, and I think that helps. I think that Debo going out was a factor, and I think that Brock Purdy doesn't play well in the rain, and Brock Purdy is a good QB, but he's not an elite QB, and I don't think that should be, like a controversial statement. But the narrative around Brock Purdy is unlike. I mean, I thought things in Denver were bad with Drew Lock, right? And where he was and the fan perception of him. But with Brock Purdy, it's on a different level. Like, after that winning drive, like, he got compared to Joe Montana to Tom Brady, to Patrick Mahomes. There were 49ers I suppose, radio personalities saying that there's no one else in the league that they take ahead of him. Not a single player would they take ahead of him. Like, it is insane. Richard Sherman has a tweet out about an hour ago going, look at this elite player, look at this clutch player. It's like, what are we doing here, guys? Brock Purdy is a good QB playing in an incredible team. They're nicknamed the Monstars for a reason. Okay, Trent Williams, very likely future Hall of Fame player. Christian McCaffrey, very likely future Hall of Fame player. Okay, Deebo Samuel, one of the better players in the league. George Kittle, one of the better tight ends in the league. Brandon Ayuk, one of the better receivers in the league. And their backups are very, very good players as well, and they have an incredible play caller who devises schemes. They had a bad day, but think about how bad. And again, Purdy is a good QB, but he had a very bad day at the office. And despite having a very bad day at the office, where he needed his receiver to make a leaping salmon-like catch, he needed Brandon Ayuk to use his fingertips to keep the ball off of the ground. They were able to do it. So the quarterback has an absolute terrible game, and they're still able to come back and beat a very good Packers team. They are scary good. Their quarterback just isn't elite, and I don't know why there needs to be this insistence that he's at the same level as Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes. He's not, but the team overall is.
The only thing I've been trying to figure out with Purdy, I absolutely accept all. I'd be interested in your take, Brian. But the only thing I've been trying to figure out with Brock Purdy since he arrived is how much better than Jimmy G actually is he. Like, I definitely think he's an upgrade on Jimmy G. And you saw in that game, and now not for the one to try, and to be fair, he did put the ball at risk a couple of times. He hit Darnell Savage in the numbers with what should have absolutely been a pick six. And that's one that the Packers will rue among many other things that happened in the game. But he ultimately, no takeaways, right? He didn't throw the back-breaking pick that we associate with Jimmy G, which, makes you realize that the upside isn't up enough to compensate for the downside. Purdy, to be fair, doesn't do that. I thought at the same time, ball placement was terrible. He looked shook at times, didn't know whether he should be wearing the glove or not wearing the glove. And he was under pressure. He was, Packers did a great job, particularly up front. And the key difference for that winning fourth quarter drive ultimately was he actually got protected properly, was able to make a couple of throws, including a lovely one to Juwan Jennings, which was his best ball of the entire game when they needed it most. So credit where credit's due. You can do things with Brock, especially if you have the Monstars around him. Just to take up one point, though, the column raised, Brian, Kyle Shanahan is an amazing play caller, but that sequence before halftime reminded us all that in a tough spot, Shanahan goes really into his shell. Like, I thought, you're in an offense here where you've got Christian McCaffrey, you got George Kittle, you got Brandon Ayuk. Okay, Deebo's injured at that point. You have this great offensive line, and you're scared of the Green Bay Packers having time. Like, you're so scared of the Packers having time here that you're going to milk the clock and try and kick a field goal rather than use your all-world offense to try and score a touchdown. That is not how you win Super Bowls.
We've seen. Well, you're talking about winning Super Bowls. We saw him climb up in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago against the Chiefs when they were up by 10. I think it was about 7.5, 8 minutes left on the clock, and we've seen other variations over the course of the last few years. And I did find it a little bit surprising that they weren't in a more aggressive manner. But maybe he recognised it wasn't a night for those type of situations where, sometimes we talk about getting the points and let the other team chase you, and maybe he just saw a nature of this game is going to come down to a score or two. We can get into halftime with the points. And it didn't look. Purdy never got going all night. And I'm not saying it's disingenuous.
Chamberlain kicking that field goal.
Well, there's been a lot of criticism over field goals, and in particular, former kickers over the course of the last 2 days, kind of getting on kickers. Like, it's easy for all these people to be sitting on the sofa and making assumptions about people holding the ball down and putting the ball in the right place. But
laces out, Ray. Laces out.
And like Daniel Whelan did a fantastic job. I'm not saying it because of obviously the Irish factor, but he did a fantastic job on that field goal to get it down. And obviously they made it, and they won later on with Carlson. Packers fans are obviously a bit disgruntled because it's not the first time Carlson has missed one this season. He's had his struggles. And
there's a sideline reporter job of the week done by I can't remember who the silent reporter was at the game. That's terrible. I can't even give the guy the proper credit. But that quote from Matt LaFleur that he tells me he just says a prayer every time Carson goes out onto the field.
Well, he did his press conference.
Building your guy up.
He did his press conference at 4:00 today. He rolled back on that. He said that was totally taken out of context, and he's very disappointed with the Fox people that rolled with a very different narrative on that story. That's not how it was described. But
my quote was taken out of context. Is the lamest excuse. Don't say it then.
Look, I think genuinely he has to recognise there's a problem with a kicker there. If he doesn't see that they have an issue with a kicker going forward, they got rid of Crosby because he couldn't deliver beyond 50, because of where he was in his career. They brought in a rookie kicker. It's worked. It's worked for the Niners as well. Albeit maybe he's missed one Saturday. He missed one in the critical moment in Cleveland when they could have won that game. Every rookie has his struggles. It's obviously whether you want to get through those struggles and see the bigger
Rory
picture.
Beggan will be pinging them over next year. They'll double down on the Irish connection. Whelan punter, Beggan kicker. Packers for the Super Bowl.
The hype train's only going to get even bigger on that. So let's hold that for when we need to discuss it, because there's no point in discussing now. The Niners offense didn't play well certainly, but their defense stepped up to an extent. And they didn't necessarily get the sacks. There was no sacks. They had 6 quarterback hits, both had 5. But what I would say is if you look at the stats of the game, Love was 15 of 22, 166, 2 touchdowns. But the last 4 drives of the game, he was 6 for 12, 30 yards. So they got it right defensively at the critical time, which ultimately
2 picks as well. Let's not forget about the turnovers.
Throw in the 2 picks. I would say from a Packers perspective, the first one as opposed to the second one for me would be more disappointing. The second one, he's trying to make a play. It's very, as you said, it's very Favre-like. If you look at the footage, we were talking about his touchdown last week, how the similarities with a Favre touchdown back in the day. Well, the interception was very, very similar to the Favre interception in the Louisiana Dome for the Vikings. But the first one was the critical moment in the game, because that was the opportunity for the Packers to go 2 scores up, whether it was a field goal and take a 10-point lead, and then not get that score at that moment in the game galvanized them defensively. And I thought the momentum shifted despite a bit of a ding dong in the third quarter with three score leads. That interception for me kind of gave the impetus to the Niners. They got it done. In terms of the Montana reference, I think it's the case of he struggled throughout the course of the game, but yeah, he managed to have a game-winning drive, shall we call it. And that's why. And I don't agree with it. I'm very much in Colum's corner here.
He's more Hannah Montana than Joe Montana. Come on.
Yeah. And there's been comments, well, he was rusty.
I love Hannah Montana. Great show.
They're all saying he was rusty. We'll see the true Brock Purdy next week. We may be the case. Maybe have a much more efficient game next week. But Lamar was rusty in the first half, but he wasn't rusty in the second half. And that's the difference when you have a marquee quarterback like that who can turn it on when he needs to turn it on. Brock turned it on for one drive on Saturday.
Right, there we leave it for our second segment of Talking Points. Colin, let's kick off our third segment of Talking Points, and we've been talking about them already, but with the Packers, one of the things I'm interested in with this playoff exit is Packers fans take great comfort, and rightly so, from the fact that they were effectively playing with house money. But I'm looking at this game and going, they really should be playing in the championship game in Detroit against a team that they beat on Thanksgiving. Like, they did everything bar get this victory over the line. A lot of things went against them. There's a terrible missed call on intentional grounding for Brock Purdy 2 plays before he hits George Kittle for a critical touchdown. There's a lot of other stuff that went against them as well. They didn't really get any luck. But I'm thinking they blew a big chance over the weekend, because really there wasn't much between them and a Super Bowl the way things would have fallen with that Lions victory over the Bucs. Like, that would have been a great championship game, Packers Lions, and all NFC North clash. You got to take advantage of your opportunities when you get them. The house money argument is fine as long as you eventually do get over the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one, right? Because had you said it before the season began, or probably after week 6, I think Packers fans would have been absolutely like, you're going to go to the divisional round and you're going to have a game of it, and you're going to miss a field goal against the Niners, but in the moment, and given how they played and given how the Niners played and the plan they had, like, I mean, the concern for me was around their defense, and would their defense be able to hold up? And It was. And yeah, some of that was Debo going out, some of that was the weather. But they will be, I think, in the fullness of time. Like if you'll always go back to Dan Marino. But I've no doubt that if you had an honest and frank conversation with Dan Marino, of course he'd look back now and wonder, what could have been. Now, I think the Packers are in a pretty decent situation, given the cap, given where the receivers, and the tight ends, they're improving. Like, they made a very conscious decision about not bringing in more experienced players. They wanted to give their young players reps, and they've been rewarded. And I think, like, if you're what I think other teams might want to take from it is commitment. Whichever way you're going, commit. The worst thing you can do is kind of play hokey cokey, where you're not entirely sure what a team is doing. Like the Titans. The Titans don't seem to be able to decide what they want to do. The Broncos don't seem to be able to decide what is it they want to do. Is it a rebuild? Is it not a rebuild? What are you committing to? And the Packers were prepared to take their lumps. And so I think maybe not having an owner as such helps some of that. And the fact that, you have to give kudos to Mark Murphy, to Goodenhurst, to LaFleur in their willingness to go with it, right? And there were times when LaFleur was really unhappy and biting his tongue. Just that it was that little bit of know-how ultimately that changed things. And there were a couple of explosive plays, like Christian McCaffrey. What can you do? Like, outside of the QB, he is the most dangerous player in the league, because ball in hand, he makes people miss. Where I talked about Mahomes getting 14, when he needs 13. Well, with Christian McCaffrey, you don't know if he's going to go for 4, 14, or 41 on any occasion when he gets the ball in his hand. And Brian has touched on it earlier, like the kicker, like. I think LaFleur, by all accounts, listening to it today, and for people who know him, he does have a very dry sense of humor. I think he'd probably take that back if he could, though, because I do think in comedy there's an awful lot of truth, and we had seen Carlson miss, or like at times, it's not a it was a bit like the Bills, and it's not all on him, because when Aaron Jones made that run, it really looked like they were going to do it, but ultimately they too came up short. I hope that the focus isn't as well on CJ Stroud, on Jordan Love turning the ball over, because yes, there were mistakes.
I don't think that was in any way emblematic of his performance. Like, certainly the second one, it's a desperation heave when maybe he had one more play and he didn't need to make that, but they're still looking for snooker at that point. I don't put that on him at all. He did more to help them win the game and put them in a position to be able to drive for overtime. Like, some of the throws were just Rodgers, like the one he hits Dobbs in the tight window throw with 3 players converging on him. It's outrageous. Like, the talent is just off the charts there.
Yeah, no, it is. And
God damn it.
Even within
there goes taking the NFC North and never giving it back.
Even with the interceptions, they will happen. They happen to everybody at times. And the biggest thing for me, I suppose, about Love is that when he has thrown them, he's bounced back immediately. Like, and that's the biggest piece in all the greats. Elway threw plenty of picks, Brady threw plenty of picks, Manning threw plenty of them. It's the ability to get back up on the horse again and just forget about it and not let it impact negatively. Learn from it, but do not become gun shy because of it.
Yeah, a lot of positives to take out of the season for Green Bay, Brian.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's one of those ones that, okay, you touched on it there early on in the season. There was, a different message from various Packers fans around how the season would play out, whether there was a quarterback concern. Obviously, that's not transpired. But this is one that they let slip, and I think this is going to kill them for a period of time. Yeah, they'll look back and they'll reflect and say, fantastic season. I was looking at the divisional round last year, and these teams, so bear in mind, all various different circumstances, different teams, different head coaches, and I totally appreciate that. The Giants, the Jags, the Bengals, the Cowboys. Not one of those teams made it back to the divisional round. 3 didn't even make the playoffs. Obviously, Bengals fans will argue their quarterback was out. And the Cowboys, who had heavy expectations to be certain in the championship game, don't even get past the wild card. And that's the nature of the NFL. And this time next year, there'll be a number of different teams back in the playoffs. Look at the Texans in 1 year, how they've evolved so quickly. That's why for Packers fans, I think they'll look at this and go, a big, big missed opportunity. You touched on it there. They could go into Detroit. They may have even been favourites going into that game next weekend. Obviously, we'll never know now, but having beaten them on Thanksgiving, they would have fancied their chances. It's one that I think they'll be around. There's many a day, I think.
Why I loved that spell. Look, you could devote an entire hour and more to Dan Campbell pre and post game speeches, but I loved what he said in the locker room after the victory over the weekend. He talked about them having 2 more games with a bye in between. Not afraid to talk Super Bowl because, like he said himself, do you know how hard it is to win playoff games in this league? When you win them, you got to keep stacking them and build that momentum because you never know how it's going to turn out next year. Colin, sorry, Brian, you were going to finish up.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Colin, the Ravens, like the narrative around Baltimore was that 2019 cast a long shadow when they got turned over as the number 1 seed by the Titans. The narrative on Lamar was, great and all as he is, double MVP likely. He'll get that as a regular season award this year, you would feel. But 1-3 in the playoffs, can you really trust him in the business end of the season? Well, the doubters were proven wrong, particularly by that second half performance. Lamar puts up 2 passing touchdowns. He rushes for 2 more. He gains 100 yards on the ground. Passer rating over 100. Case closed.
Yeah. Like they answered everything that you wanted them to answer, like everything from 2019, and especially that they did it at halftime, because they hadn't played particularly well. It would have been very easy, a lot of people in sports are very superstitious. You could have gone in there, you could have thought, oh no, this is happening again. And instead, by all accounts, look, it wasn't like you can make huge adjustments. We've seen, the Mannings talk about that. But Lamar, had words, and they did change things in that they started to get rid of the ball a lot quicker. They realized what they needed to do, and they now finally have put players around Lamar so that, he can get rid of the ball. They did, again, it was the opposite of what the Eagles did, where the Eagles saw Hurts get blitzed time and time and time again, and they would have known that even before that game, but they did nothing to help him. Whereas in this game, the Texans, who haven't blitzed a huge amount, just blitzed over 70%. And it was successful initially. But as the game went on, that's where the Ravens adjusted. And I thought it was a sensational performance. I really did. I thought Lamar was brilliant. And I thought that the defense it's just incredible. It really is. It is everything, the disguise looks, the way they hand things off, their communication up front, they are like such a serious unit. And I think Mike McDonald is rightly getting the talk about it. I think what would be fascinating would be if he was to go to the Seahawks, and that you've got the Shanahan boys in that conference. Would that not be interesting to see him go against McVay twice a year, against Shanahan twice a year? I think that to me, I would have the Ravens as the favorites, but they still have got to try to figure out a way to get through Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes as the underdog, is he 8 of 11? Did I see that?
8 of 11 is an underdog, yeah.
It's that's ridiculous. Like, it is ridiculous. But the Ravens,
the words Patrick Mahomes and underdog should not be used in the same sentence. Like, I think that's ridiculous.
I mean, that should be a great debate, I think, that we have then on Thursday, because how do you not make him under against this Ravens team who have so many different ways to beat you? And can I just say that the Isaiah Likely touchdown catch, I mean, that was just beautiful. Like, the fact that the ball, like, he just plucked it out of the air. I mean, it was just a magical kind of throw and catch.
There's a guy that stepped up in a major way as well. Like, the absence of Mark Andrews, we thought would be keenly felt. Mark Andrews, who may well be back for the championship game, it should be said, and is one of the reasons why the Ravens are 3.5-point favourites there with our partner QuinnBet, and we'll get to the odds for the games a little bit later, Brian. But that defense that Colin described there, I mean, they've got Lamar. They piled up 229 rushing yards offensively. They're a remorseless beast on that side of the ball, but they're no less remorseless or ruthless defensively. Madubuike up front is a sack machine. Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen are the two best linebackers in the league, arguably certainly the best linebacker tandem. You got Kyle Hamilton in there. You got Marlon Humphrey in there. We mentioned briefly earlier the Texans did not have a possession in the red zone for the entirety of that game. They just completely shut CJ Stroud down. The only way they got in the end zone was a brilliant punt return, which I'm sure the Baltimore Ravens will be very, very annoyed about, and they'll be looking to do even better next week. And what a mouthwatering prospect it is to see how Mahomes and Reed are going to try and cope with that. But it's a pretty intimidating prospect.
It was, and 9 pre-snap penalties on the offensive line kind of tells a tale as well, that they were so concerned and agitated by the fact that they couldn't deal with what was coming at them. And I would give Stroud a little bit of credit, like, for the nature of who he is and how he handled that, because he was under so much pressure for large parts of the game. But you touched on it there. They didn't get in the red zone once. They didn't have, a throw beyond 25 yards, I think it was, which was the one to Dalton Schultz early on in the game. And essentially shut them down. The second half in particular, like, we're talking about adjustments, with the offense for the Ravens having three and outs before halftime, then they go touchdown, field goal. But the defense adjusted as well. Like, they would have looked at it in the first half where they were essentially losing out. Whilst they weren't moving the ball, they still had some opportunities with various different plays to Nico Collins. So they shut Nico Collins down, who really is their marquee wide receiver in the second half. Nothing went for the Texans.
And they were like, they lost 34-10, but I don't think it would be fair to make it sound like they were beaten out the gate. Like, I thought they emptied the tank. They took everything they could out of their kit bag and threw it at the Ravens, and it wasn't enough because they were just overmatched. There was no shame in losing to that team. We've seen them dismantle the 49ers. We've seen them dismantle the Detroit Lions. Conveniently, the two teams that are left on the other side of the draw. And the Texans did not go down without a fight, but they just didn't have enough weapons.
Yeah, and I was looking, we're talking about dismantling teams. I was looking at their numbers even over the course of the last month. Christmas Day in Santa Clara, they put up 33 points. They put up 56 on the Dolphins. They put up another 34 in a playoff game. You're right. Like, whilst it's a very comprehensive score, like the likely touchdown, which was a fantastic snag, Columns alluded to, that took place with something like 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It was, I think everybody knew it, that had the sense of that stage the Ravens were going to win. But that was the one that was ultimately that put the game away, 2-score lead, and that took till 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. So, like, the Texans, and we think we touched on it on the social channel on Twitter, and certainly they've had a really positive season. There's a very good likelihood here that they may have been beaten by the team that ultimately wins a lot in terms of going to Las Vegas and win the Super Bowl. Nothing to be shamed on in terms of how they perform, but ultimately they came up against a monster right now in terms of who are the leading team for the Super Bowl. But as Colin said, Chiefs do things, and Mahomes and stuff at critical moments in the season. We touched on it earlier on in the season. The Chiefs tend to just not necessarily stroll, they evolve as the season continues, and then they get to a stage where the critical point in the season, and they find ways to navigate victories. And look, Ravens are rightly favourites for Sunday, but I think there's a big test coming on Sunday as well.
Well, let's have a quick look at that, Colin, before we wrap. Obviously, we're going to unpack these games in full, and we'll have our full preview and picks show later on in the week. But both of the number one seeds still in the draw on either side. Both of them are the favourites, unsurprisingly, playing at home. Ravens, as we said, 3.5-point favourites over the Chiefs. Niners are 7-point favourites with QuinnBet against the Lions at Santa Clara in the NFC. That Ravens Chiefs game, though, we've been talking about the Chiefs all season and kind of saying, well, they're not right. But one thing about this team is they're doing something that no other team is trying to do in the league. Where other teams are trying to prove that they can get over the hump, the Chiefs are trying to build a dynasty. They're on a completely different level. They have full confidence that they can win in every single situation. Why wouldn't they feel they can go to M&T Bank Stadium and get past the Ravens?
Yeah, and they should. Like, they have the best quarterback. Now he is going up against I think the inevitable league MVP, and what I would argue is the most dangerous player. But this is exactly what you want when you have, if the Ravens are going to make it, then they're going to have to beat the champ. And that's kind of exactly what you want. And I mean, Patrick Mahomes
To
talked
be the
about
man, you got to beat the man.
there you go. He talked about, like, obviously playing at Arrowhead is special, but playing on the road, he seemed to enjoy. And I mean, I think what you're looking at, like, is we've seen Mike McDonald, as they just talked about earlier, like, he seems to be the Shanahan killer. Now we get to see it against Mahomes and Reed in a playoff game, and that's what makes it fascinating. But you also have a revitalized Ravens offense in comparison to previous years. And I think what I would point to, and this is where I think many teams, Cowboys, Eagles, others, are making a mistake, in that they're letting the status quo, they're letting good enough get in the way of being great. Like, the Ravens could have kind of stayed pat, and they probably would have made the playoffs most years. I think if they got the contract done with Lamar earlier, they would have definitely had Lamar for all those playoff runs. But they didn't, right? They moved on from Wink. They moved on from Greg Roman. They said, no, we're going to go out and we're going to look to Wink has been great. It's been, really interesting, but he doesn't, our ceiling is too low when Wink is in charge. And our ceiling with Greg Roman, well, when your offensive coordinator needs a passing game coordinator beside him, I spoke about it in yesterday's kind of review show with Dan. That's like Nathaniel Hackett needing the clock guy.
Greg Roman's best ever passing performance, good for 13th in the NFL in that particular season. His next best passing offense, 23rd. You just can't win with a passing game like that. However good his rushing offense is, and he's probably one of the best run game coordinators in the league.
But in ways, yes, Connor. But really, has the running game, has it been dramatically impacted by Greg Roman leaving? I mean, the passing game has taken such a leap forward, but you can't say the running game has, like, really
229 yards against the Texans. They ran for more than they passed for, which is crazy in the modern NFL. But anyway.
Yeah, so I just think they deserve huge kudos for being willing to go out and make the changes and go outside of their comfort zone, right? And I think Harbaugh deserves credit, because so many coaches, particularly when they're long tenured, it's so easy to just bring in the guys who you're comfortable with, bring in your friends, and that tends to be where you stop evolving, and the Ravens have zigged when many others were zagging.
49ers favoured in Santa Clara at home, of course, Brian. 7-point favourites against the Lions in that one. But there was a lot of flaws exposed in that Packers game, and for all the damage that Aaron Jones did, I'm sure Jahmyr Gibbs is licking his chops, thinking I can do the same thing. Now you might look at that in the other direction and go, the Lions don't seem to be able to stop elite wide receivers to save their life. They gave up 181 yards to Puka Nacua. Mike Evans had the run of the field. 49ers aren't short of guys who like to catch passes. This one could be a blowout, or it could be a massive shock.
I'd imagine they're going to have a bit more sophisticated offensively in terms of their drives and try control the clock, the Lions, and I think they will have to get that two-headed monster back working this weekend. It didn't really materialize yesterday with Montgomery having a slower day compared to Jahmyr Gibbs, but ultimately I think they're going to need both power backs to have a really strong day, and like the 49ers have been exposed in their own games at times this season, so maybe this is the one where the Lions find a way to beat them in their own game, essentially, in terms of how strong they can be with McCaffrey. Interesting one that hasn't really been discussed too much today is, let's not forget, Goff knows this Santa Clara. He knows the 49ers. He knows Shanahan, having spent so many years with the Rams. He's 3-6 as a record against the 49ers. He has had victories there, albeit different scenarios. I don't think he ever threw for over 263 yards against the Niners, but he's averaging over 300 this year with the players they have I think they're in with a hell of a chance. What concerns me is we've seen it in the past, different dynamics, different situation. A different NFC North team, and the Vikings haven't won that game against the Saints in the miracle game in Minnesota, and everybody assumed they were going to go to the Super Bowl. They went and got absolutely blown out in the championship game the following week. That kind of worries me for a team like the Lions, that they could two really stellar wins in the playoffs, and they think the momentum is building, but they go up against a bigger cat, and that ultimately is probably the best team in the NFC, and they get the doors blown off them. I don't think they can be chasing the game next weekend. I think they have to lead from the front, and for me, that has to happen with the two running backs having a really strong day. But it makes for a great game. I'm really looking forward to them.
Anyway, let's keep our powder dry, because we're going to unpack all that later on in the week when we get down to the nitty gritty and get to getting with our picks and our as we preview those games for the weekend. It's championship weekend coming up. It's hard to believe it's rolled around so quickly, but there we are, and we'll be there right alongside you on the Irish NFL Show.